Only 7 people were in that room. 7. And every single one of them spent the rest of their lives trying to explain what they saw and failing. No camera captured it, no journalist reported it, no official record was ever filed. The man who lost never spoke publicly about it again. Not once, not in interviews, not in private, not ever. What happened in that sweltering back room in Hong Kong in the spring of 1972 was supposed to stay buried, a private matter between 2 warriors, witnessed by almost no one, remembered by all of them like a wound that never fully closed. But secrets have a way of escaping, and this one refused to die. The man across the room. His name was Priya Pichai. If you don't know that name, understand this. In 1972, inside the world of combat sports, that name meant fear. Priya was 31 years old, a Muay Thai fighter out of Chiang Mai, Thailand. 6'1", 212 pounds of dense, road-hardened muscle built from 15 years of training that began when he was barely old enough to carry his own weight. He had fought professionally over 90 times. He had knocked men unconscious with a single elbow strike. He had broken 3 opponents' ribs with body kicks so precise, so violent, that the sounds were described by witnesses as like a bat hitting green wood. He was not a showman. He was not theatrical. He didn't need to be. Priya Pichai was a weapon, a walking, breathing, blinking weapon who happened to speak in short sentences and smile only when he was certain of victory. And when he arrived in Hong Kong that April, traveling with a small entourage of his trainer, his manager, and 2 fellow fighters, he was very certain of victory. He had seen Bruce Lee's films, The Big Boss, Fist of Fury. He had watched them the same way a lion watches a bird, with mild curiosity and zero concern. He had laughed during the fight scenes, not mockingly exactly, more like the way a surgeon laughs when someone brags about using a bandage. Technically fine, entertaining even, but not real. Cinema, Priya said, when his manager mentioned Bruce Lee's reputation. Just that one word, cinema. His trainer, a wiry older man named Sumpong, who had been in Muay Thai for 40 decades, was slightly less dismissive. Sumpong had heard things, specific things, stories from fighters who had been in rooms with Bruce Lee, not on film sets, not at exhibitions, but in private. Stories about speed that made no physical sense, about strikes that landed before the brain registered the movement had begun. Sumpong mentioned this once, only once. Priya looked at him and said, "He weighs 50 kilograms." And that was the end of the conversation. Bruce Lee knew who Priya Pichai was. He had made it his business to know. For years, Bruce had been studying Muay Thai, not as a curiosity, not as a tourist studies foreign culture, but with the obsessive, surgical focus he applied to everything he decided to understand. He had books. He had correspondence with fighters and coaches in Thailand. He had, on at least 2 occasions, trained privately with practitioners of the art, specifically to understand its devastating efficiency. He respected it. But respect is not the same as fear. When Bruce agreed to the meeting, it was framed as a private demonstration, a cultural exchange between martial artists. He went in clear-eyed. He knew what Priya was capable of. He had done his homework with the same relentless discipline he applied to everything else in his life. He went in knowing. That mattered. The location was a private gymnasium in the Kowloon district, not glamorous, concrete floors, high ceilings, the kind of place that smelled of effort, dried sweat and leather, and the particular metallic sharpness of old equipment. There were 7 people total. Priya's side, Sumpong the trainer, his manager, a heavy-set man named Chaiwat, and one of the Thai fighters who had traveled with them, a young man named Kosin, who was documenting the trip in a personal journal that would only surface decades later. Bruce's side, his longtime friend and training partner Ted Wong, a Hong Kong filmmaker named Raymond Cho who had business reasons for being present, and a martial artist named Hawkins Chang who had known Bruce since childhood in Hong Kong and had been invited specifically because Bruce trusted his eyes. And then the two men themselves. In that room, on that day, the energy was the specific, particular tension of two predators meeting on neutral ground, polite on the surface, calculated underneath, both of them reading the other with the kind of attention that most people reserve for reading words. Priya entered first. He was already warmed up. He wore traditional Thai shorts, red and gold. His hands were wrapped. He moved around the space with the slow, proprietary confidence of a man who had been comfortable in rooms like this since he was 16 years old. Then Bruce Lee walked in.
Here is what Kosin wrote in his journal about that moment, translated decades later. The small man entered, and I thought there must be a mistake. He looked like someone's younger brother who had wandered in from the street. Slim, almost delicate. He wore simple clothes. But then Priya looked at him, and something changed in Priya's face for just a moment, just one moment. And I had never seen that expression on Priya before, and I did not know what to call it. Kosin did not give it a name in his journal, but those who have read the full account suggest the word he was searching for was recognition. Not fear, not yet, but the instinctive animal recognition that happens between experienced fighters when they encounter someone whose stillness is a little too controlled, whose eyes move a little too precisely, whose entire physical presence radiates the quiet, organized danger of a thing that has been sharpened and sharpened and sharpened until it needs no further advertisement. Bruce Lee shook hands with Priya. He smiled, genuinely, warmly. He said something in Cantonese that Chaiwat translated, something about his respect for Muay Thai and for Priya's record. Priya nodded. He said little. The formalities lasted perhaps 4 minutes. Then Sampong and Ted Wong stepped back, and the room changed. What happened next was not a scheduled fight. There were no rounds, no referee, no rules explicitly agreed upon. This was the kind of exchange that exists in a gray space, somewhere between a sparring session and something more serious, governed only by the unspoken code that both men understood completely. They would test each other, genuinely, with real intent, real speed, real technique, controlled enough that no one was meant to be destroyed, but honest enough that nothing would be hidden. That was the agreement. It lasted exactly as long as it took for things to become real. They circled each other for the first 30 seconds, just movement, just information gathering, the way two chess grandmasters study the board before the first move, not passively, but actively, reading pattern and tendency and instinct from the way the other body moved through space. Priya moved beautifully, fluid, rhythmic, his weight distribution almost hypnotically efficient. His hands were low, the traditional Muay Thai guard, but his elbows were positioned to protect his ribs and his chin simultaneously. His lead leg was mobile, ready to generate the low kick that had buckled better men than the ones standing before him. Bruce moved differently. He moved like water that had decided to become fire. His stance was narrow, his hands high, his weight forward in a way that looked almost aggressive but was in fact perfectly calibrated, balanced enough to redirect instantly in any direction, forward enough to close distance in a fraction of a second. He was relaxed. That was the thing that Kosin kept returning to in his journal, the thing that seemed impossible. The small man looked like he was standing at a bus stop, Kosin wrote, like he was waiting for something pleasant to happen. Prior threw the first strike, a probing jab, not full commitment but real speed, real intent, testing Bruce's reaction time, testing whether the stories were cinema or something else. Bruce slipped it, not blocked it, not parried it, slipped it. His head moved offline by perhaps 3 centimeters, no more, at exactly the last possible moment, with the kind of precision that requires not just training, but a neurological calibration that borders on the inhuman. The fist passed his ear. Priya felt nothing but air where impact should have been. He reset, recalibrated. His expression did not change, he was too experienced for that, but his eyes sharpened by a fraction. He tried again, this time a combination. Jab, cross, teep to the body. The front kick that Muay Thai fighters use to control distance and disrupt rhythm. Fast, practiced, lethal in its familiarity. Bruce was not there for the jab, he was not there for the cross, and when the teep came he did something that made Sampong, who had been in Muay Thai for 40 years, audibly exhale. He caught it, not with 2 hands, with one, with the kind of casual, terrifying certainty of a man catching a thrown newspaper. He held Priya's leg for exactly 1 second, 1 second of total control, then he released it and stepped back. The room was absolutely silent. Kosin wrote, Chaiwat looked at me, I looked at Chaiwat. Neither of us spoke. Priya stood very still for a moment. His expression had shifted. Not to fear, not yet, but to something more complex than dismissal, something that looked for the first time like full attention. He had brought his full attention. Now he brought his respect. And then he did what great fighters do when they are finally genuinely challenged. He reached deeper. He shifted his weight, reassessed his range, and decided to close the distance, to bring it into the clinch, to take Bruce Lee into the grinding interior war that Muay Thai had owned for centuries, where size and strength and technical brutality combined into something that no amount of speed could solve. He moved forward. And that was the moment everything changed. He moved forward. And that was the moment everything changed. Priya Pichai had closed distance on over 90 professional opponents. 90 men who knew it was coming. 90 men who had trained specifically to prevent it. And in almost every single case, Priya had gotten inside, had locked his arm around a neck, had pulled a head down into the grinding trap of the Muay Thai clinch, and had begun the patient, devastating process of dismantling whatever stood before him. He was not arrogant about this. It was simply a fact of his life, the way gravity is a fact, not questioned, not celebrated, simply true. He moved forward with controlled aggression. His lead hand reached to establish the grip. His body weight began to transfer forward and slightly left, a motion so deeply embedded in muscle memory that it required no thought, no decision, no conscious intention. Priya Pichai's body simply knew this movement the way a river knows downhill. But Bruce Lee knew it too. He had studied this. Not for this moment, not for this specific man. He had studied it years before, because Bruce Lee studied everything that could kill him, everything that represented a genuine problem, everything that fell outside the comfortable boundaries of what he already understood. The Muay Thai clinch had represented exactly that, a genuine problem. And genuine problems for Bruce Lee were not obstacles, they were invitations. He had spent weeks of private obsessive study, understanding the clinch's mechanics, the weight transfer, the grip points, the brief window between initiation and establishment, when the clinch was neither fully formed nor fully committed. That narrow, almost theoretical moment, when a man who was fast enough and precise enough could do something that violated the expected physics of the situation. That window lasted less than half a second. For most people, it did not exist at all. For Bruce Lee, it was a doorway. Priya's hand reached forward, and Bruce moved, not backward, not sideways, through. He stepped inside the reach, inside it, closer rather than farther, and in the same motion, the same single unbroken fluid motion, his right hand came upward in a short, vertical strike. Not a full punch, not a haymaker, something smaller, and infinitely more precise. A strike powered not by the arm, but by the entire kinetic chain, legs, hips, torso, shoulder, elbow, wrist, all of it firing in a sequence so compressed, so perfectly timed, that the total delivery time from initiation to impact was measured not in fractions of a second, but in fractions of fractions. It caught Priya directly beneath the chin, not the jaw, not the cheek, beneath the chin, at the precise anatomical point, where the impact travels most efficiently along the spinal column, and into the vestibular system, the body's balance and orientation center, creating the particular neurological disruption that no amount of strength or conditioning can fully absorb. It was not a brutal strike. It was a surgical one.
The sound it made was small. That was the first thing Hawkins Chung would remember years later when he described the moment in private conversations. The sound was almost nothing, a short, dense, contained impact. Not the crashing thunder of a heavy bag being destroyed, not the dramatic crack of movie combat, just a small, certain sound, like a key turning in a lock. Preya's forward momentum stopped. Not gradually, not with stumbling or staggering. It stopped the way a machine stops when its power source is disconnected, completely, immediately, with the totality of a system that has simply ceased to function in the way it was functioning one moment before. His legs held. He did not fall. His body had enough involuntary structural integrity to keep him upright. But his eyes went somewhere else for a moment. Somewhere interior. Somewhere that had nothing to do with the concrete gymnasium in Kaloum or the 7 people standing in it. He stood there. 3 seconds. 4. Sampong took 1 step forward, then stopped himself. Bruce had already stepped back. His hands were down. His expression was not triumphant. It was not satisfied in the way of a man who has won something. It was focused and careful and watchful, the expression of someone monitoring a situation, not celebrating it. He was watching Preya the way you watch a fire you've just controlled, respectfully, with full attention, ready for whatever came next. What came next was silence. Deep, total, concrete-walled silence. Kosin wrote in his journal. Preya stood still for a long time. Then he blinked. Then he looked at the small man across the room, and the look on his face was not anger, and it was not shame. It was something I had never seen on his face in all the years I had known him. It was wonder. He looked like a child who has just understood something enormous and cannot yet find words for it. Then he did something I did not expect. He put his fist to his chest, the traditional gesture of respect, and he bowed his head. And the small man bowed back. And that was all. That was all. No celebration. No boasting. No victory speech from the winner. No excuses from the man who had just experienced something he had never experienced in 92 professional fights. 7 people stood in a concrete room in Kaloum, and the air between them held the weight of something that had no name. Raymond Chow, the filmmaker, would say later, in private, to a single trusted colleague, never publicly, that walking out of that gymnasium felt like walking out of a church, that there was something in that room that he did not have language for, that he was a practical man, a businessman, a man who dealt in budgets and schedules and commercial realities, and that none of his frameworks applied to what he had witnessed. He said this only once. Then he never mentioned it again.
The 7 people who witnessed it scattered into their separate lives. Preya Pichai returned to Thailand within the week. He continued fighting professionally for 3 more years, compiling an even more remarkable record, before retiring to train the next generation of Muay Thai champions. He became one of the most respected figures in Thai combat sports, a man of few words and legendary status. He was interviewed dozens of times over the course of his life. He was asked about Bruce Lee exactly once. The interviewer was a Thai sports journalist sometime in the early 1980s. He had heard the story secondhand, fragments of it distorted through years of retelling, and he asked Preya directly whether there was any truth to the rumors, whether he had ever met Bruce Lee, whether they had ever tested each other. Preya looked at the journalist for a long moment. Then he said, "Some things do not need to be explained." He never answered another question about it. Hawkins Chung was more forthcoming, but only in old age and only in the specific context of explaining what Bruce Lee had meant to martial arts as a discipline and a philosophy. He did not tell the story as a story of dominance. He told it as a story of understanding. "People always want to know who won," he said. "They are asking the wrong question. The right question is, what did winning mean to Bruce? It did not mean what it means to most people. It was not about proving something. It was about knowing something." He paused, and Bruce already knew. Ted Wong said nothing publicly about that day for the rest of his life, but those who knew him, who trained with him in the years after Bruce's death,
who inherited pieces of Jeet Kune Do philosophy from his careful, rigorous teaching, said that when the subject of Bruce's speed came up, Ted Wong would sometimes get a particular expression on his face. Not nostalgic, not sad, something quieter, like a man who carries a private memory that is too precise, too real, too specific to fit inside ordinary language. He would simply nod and change the subject. Kosin's journal surfaced in the early 2000s, not dramatically, not in a way that created headlines or sparked documentaries. It was mentioned in a small academic paper on the cultural history of Muay Thai, cited as a primary source in a footnote. The relevant passages were translated by a researcher at a Bangkok university, who included them in a longer work about Thai martial arts' international reputation in the 1970s. Most people who read the academic paper skipped the footnote. But a handful of Bruce Lee scholars, the serious ones, the ones who had spent years separating mythology from documented reality, found it, tracked it down, read the full translated passages, and they recognized something in Kosin's descriptions that matched, precisely, specifically, point by point, the technical accounts that other witnesses from other private encounters had given over the years. The same detail about the stillness, the same detail about the sound, the same detail about the moment of impact, the inexplicable feeling, described independently by multiple people across multiple years, that what they had seen had not quite obeyed the rules of cause and effect that governed the rest of their experience of the physical world. Not supernatural, never supernatural. Bruce Lee himself would have rejected that framing immediately and with visible irritation. But something beyond ordinary expectation. Something that required a new framework to understand.
Here is what Bruce Lee believed. Not what he performed, not what he said in interviews for public consumption, but what he believed, evidenced by the way he lived and trained and thought. Size is a noun. Speed is a verb. A noun describes what something is. A verb describes what something does. And in the moment of truth, in the real, unpredictable, non-cinematic reality of genuine confrontation, what something does is the only thing that matters. Priya Pichai weighed 212 pounds. He was 6'1". He had 92 professional fights and a record of violence that few men on earth could match. Every single one of those facts is a noun. Bruce Lee had a strike that could travel so fast, with such perfect mechanical efficiency, that it arrived at its destination before a larger, stronger, more experienced opponent could complete the motion he had already begun. That is a verb. That is what he did. And the distance between those two things, between the noun and the verb, between the description and the reality, is where Bruce Lee lived, where he trained, obsessively, relentlessly, with a hunger that people who were close to him sometimes found difficult to be near because of its intensity. He was not trying to be the best in the room. He was trying to understand something true. He had written in his notes, the private ones, the ones not written for publication but for himself, thinking on paper in the way that serious minds do, that the ultimate expression of martial art is not the defeat of an opponent. It is the elimination of the concept of opponent. Most people read that as philosophy, as abstraction, as the kind of thing a deep thinker says to sound profound. Priya Pichai, standing in a concrete gymnasium in Kulum in the spring of 1972, experienced what it meant in practice. The moment Bruce stepped inside his reach, not away, not sideways, but through, Priya ceased to be an opponent in the conventional sense. He became something else entirely. He became a situation, a set of physical conditions that Bruce had already mapped, already understood, already resolved in the fraction of a second that it took for his entire body to become one single directed expression of force. Not force against force, force through force. That distinction is the whole of it. That distinction is what Sampang, the 40-year veteran, exhaled over when Bruce caught the teep with one hand. That distinction is what Kosin saw on Priya's face and could not name until later he found the right word: wonder. Bruce Lee died 14 months after that afternoon in Kulum. He was 32 years old. He was, by the assessment of nearly everyone who had ever encountered him in genuine physical exchange, at the absolute peak of his development, still accelerating, still deepening, still finding new layers of understanding in the disciplines he had devoted his life to. What he might have become with another decade, another 2 decades, is a question that cannot be answered. But what he was, what he demonstrated in private rooms that most people never saw,
in exchanges that never made headlines and were never meant to. That is something that those 7 people in Kulum could answer. Not with a number, not with a record, not with a trophy or a title or a belt, with an expression on the face of a 92-fight veteran who had never been surprised in his life. With the small, certain sound of a key turning in a lock. With the silence that followed. They said Bruce Lee was small. They were right. He was. They said he was fast. They were right about that too. But they were right the way people are right when they say the ocean is wet, technically accurate and completely insufficient. They said he was a movie star. He was, and the movies were extraordinary, but they were the reflection of something, the shadow on the wall of something that existed in private, in concrete rooms, in the honest dark where cameras didn't reach and mythology hadn't yet arrived. The real thing was what happened in Kulum. The real thing was 7 people standing in silence around a moment that none of them had adequate language for. The real thing was a man who spent his entire short life in pursuit of a single question: what is actually true when everything false has been removed, and who found answers that he expressed not in words, but in fractions of seconds, in the precise geography of a strike, in the controlled, intentional, devastating truth of a body that had been sharpened into something language could not hold. No one challenged him again. Not like that. Not genuinely. Not with the full, honest intention that Priya Pichai brought into that gymnasium and left, changed, on the concrete floor. Because the word got out. Not loudly, not in articles or announcements, but in the way that real things travel, quietly, specifically, from person to person in the particular community of people who would understand what it meant. And what it meant was this: whatever you think Bruce Lee is, he is more than that. Whatever ceiling you have constructed for him in your mind, the reality exceeds it. Whatever size tells you should be possible, and whatever strength tells you should be true, he has already been to the other side of those ideas and sent back a message that arrived not in words, but in the expression on Priya Pichai's face. Wonder. Bruce Lee did not fight to be remembered. He fought to know, and in knowing, truly, completely, without ego or theater or the comfortable lies of size and strength, he became something that memory cannot contain. He became the question that martial arts is still trying to answer. And every time someone steps into a room and believes that mass is power, that height is advantage, that the bigger man wins because the universe is fair, somewhere in that belief there is a gap. A narrow gap, smaller than a second. And through that gap moves something that weighs 130 pounds and has already arrived before you began.